All right, welcome back. It's been about a week since I've done a guitar building video, and this is not one of them, but it's guitar building related, because what I want to do now is tell you what I did last night to experiment with some inlay. I started making a video. I made a bunch of mistakes in the video, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just tired of making the video. Let me just go do the work. And then I made a bunch of mistakes in the work. So I figured, okay, time for me to come back and tell you what I did and what I'm doing. So the purpose of this is I need to get my process for doing inlay down before I start cutting out my fretboard. The fretboard's, you know, rosewood, and I'm going to be using maple for the inlays, and I've got some crosses, and I've got some letters, and just different stuff, and I really don't want to, and it's all small, like really small. So I don't want to learn how to do what I'm about to do on something really tiny. So what I've got here is a planter box, three planter boxes that I'm building for my mother-in-law, and I'm going to put some face plates on them with my grandkids' names on them. So that way when they come over to Nana's house, each one of them has their own little plants that they get to take care of, and it'll just be fun. But the nice thing is all the letters for their names are all going to be like 3 inches tall. So this is going to make it a lot easier for me to make some mistakes with, and for me to fix and find out what's going on and refine my process before I get down to doing stuff that's, you know, maybe a centimeter, a little bit more than that. So let me show you what I've got going on here. This is the planter box that I'm making for her. It's just a simple box. And this is where the kids' names are going to go. My son made the planters, and it's going to sit on top. So this is just to hold up the planters. And this is going to put the kids' names right here. What I've got is I've got 3 pieces of 5-inch by 24-inch big box store pine wood. Okay, got the clearest, straightest stuff I could find, which really isn't saying much, but it's not bad. And I've planed it down to a specific thickness, and this is important. It's not that important on this particular part, but planing and getting everything down to a really particular thickness for what I'm doing is really important. So I've got their names written here, and one thing that you'll see is I actually spelled Lila's name wrong. You'll see that when I'm doing my cutout from last night. I've gone back and fixed it. I've only seen it spelled out once, so cut me some slack. Sorry, Lila, but you can't spell either. You're only 2 months old. This is going to be how I cut it out, and I've got the boards all clamped down on the CNC, and I'm going to run my tool paths. And here's what the tool path looks like. It's really simple. It's an engraved tool path in Fusion, and all you do is you just go down here, go 2D, and engrave, and that creates this. And what I used is this 120-degree V-bit. And this is really important. And why am I using 120 degree? Not that I care about the angle, but I needed a bit that was wide enough to be able to touch both sides of the largest letter in this engraving at the same time. If your bit doesn't do that, you're not going to engrave a V in the letter. You're going to engrave a W in the letter, and that means you're going to have an island of stuff sticking up that you're going to have to clear out either with a chisel or something else, and I'm not messing with that. So having a bit that's wide enough to touch both edges of the letters when you're doing the engraving is super important. The downside with that 120-degree V-bit is it's shallow. I mean, it's not shallow. It's, you know, the bit cuts down about 3/4 of an inch, but I don't need to go that deep, and when you get to some of these smaller areas, it doesn't get very deep at all, and it leaves the letters kind of paper thin on the reverse stock that I'm talking about. This is going to give me a path that looks a lot like this, and this is the simplest part of the engraving, is engraving the stuff in the wood. And if you were going to fill in your engraving with epoxy or whatever, that's as far as you got to go. You're done. You could fill it in with epoxy, let it dry, send it through the planer, and you got a nice pretty engraving. But when you want to set up a piece of inlay that's going to go in this, things get a lot tougher. I need to use the same letters, the same font, obviously, and I'm going to use the same V-bit, but look at my tool paths. I need more. I need one that basically just traces out the letters, and the V-bit is going to trace this letters to where basically the point of that bit is going to follow the outside edge of the letters. And the inside edge of these letters, okay? It looks like this when you run that engraving. I'm sorry, I'm going to call it engraving. It's a trace operation. So that's great. It's engraved the letters, and you can see how the letters will fit in like a puzzle piece into that other engraving. But it won't fit in the way that it is because we've still got all of this extra wood that's higher than all of the letters, and this has to go away. So now I have to run another toolpath, and here is where one of my problems came up. In Fusion, you have the ability to run an adaptive clearing, okay, to where it basically looks at what you've done and says, okay, I want to clear out everything else. And here's what this looks like with a 1/4 inch end mill. And why am I using a 1/4 inch? Because it's fast. It'll go through this pretty quickly and knock it all out. But because it's a 1/4 inch, it can't get into these little tight corners like this or in here. It's going to leave stuff that I can't have. And so the plan was to run a 1/4 inch adaptive clearing and then come back and hit a 1/16 inch, and that would catch the other stuff. It still wouldn't get into the perfectly sharp corners, but it would be good enough for doing what I'm trying to do. Here's the problem. The Fusion doesn't do, and this is called rest machining, by the way. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So first, we're going to simulate this, and we're going to run it. And that's where that 1/4 inch bit's just going to go around, and it's clearing off everything that is not a letter. And you can see where it's going, but if you look right down here, it doesn't get to this part of the J because it's too wide. So it avoids the parts that it can't get into. And it does a pretty fair job of getting pretty close, but it's not perfect. And especially when I'm about to do little tiny parts, and I'm doing tiny parts, I won't be using a 1/4 inch, but I'm going to have to pay attention to the problem here. And here's where the problem is. Okay, that simulation's done. I was planning on following this up with a 1/16 inch adaptive. And this is called a rest operation. This is where you tell it the same exact path, but you tell it rest machining. You tell it to go carve the same things, and you tell it what is the diameter of the previous tool that did this path. Well, my diameter of my previous tool is a 1/4 inch. And what's the corner radius? Well, it's not a ball end mill, it's a flat end mill, so there is no corner radius, so it's 0. And so you would think if you put this in here that it would come through and would catch these other pieces, the pieces that it missed. And let me show you the pieces I'm talking about. I'm expecting it to get into this A up here, into this J, and clean out all the other stuff that this one left off, which isn't much work. However, and this isn't a CNC problem. This is a problem that shows up right here on this screen. So you can see what it's doing. It's going in there and saying, I see that this stuff was left from the previous operation. I'll clear that out. And that might be true for this. But I can guarantee you that is not all the stuff that was left over by that previous operation. And let me speed this up so we can get down to the very end so I can show you what I'm talking about. And it just goes around, hops around, and touches little things like the gaps in between letters and stuff like that. But here's what it didn't do. It didn't do that A. It should have, but it didn't clear it out. And I don't know why. And this is not an aberration on the screen. This actually is exactly what happened when I did it on the wood. So what I ended up having to do is run this entire adaptive path with a 1/16 inch bit for all 3 pieces. A 1/16 inch bit only steps over a couple of thousandths. It took forever. And so I'm not really sure. Now, I'm not going to be doing really big things like this, so that's not really a big deal. But that's if you are, keep that in mind, that either I'm doing something wrong or there's a bug in the program. I'm going to go with I'm doing something wrong, and I'm going to reach out to tech support and find out what it is. But if it turns out to be a bug, I'm going to let you know that too. Anyway, this was the plan. So let me take you out to the CNC where I actually did the cutout work and show you what happened. And I'm going to do something a little bit different here. I've been told that nobody wants to hear a CNC running and a router and all that noise, and that it's just a little bit too hard to listen to. So instead of that, I'm going to play some music that I played on the last guitar that I built at the end of my build video. It was called The Barn Burner, and you can find it on YouTube, I think. So I'm just going to play that instead while the CNC is running. Hopefully it's less hard on the ears. Hopefully. It's still my guitar playing, so it might still be hard on the ears. Anyway, hopefully you like it.